Electric car drivers exclusively using rapid or ultra-rapid public chargers pay around 18p per mile for electricity, but this is compared to roughly 19p per mile for petrol and 21p per mile for diesel, so only 1 or 2 to 3 pence more expensive if you're actually using fuel.
Yeah, so not much difference there. And according to the RAC, the cost of charging an electric car using public charging points on a pay-as-you-go basis has risen by 42% in just 4 months.
That's why joining us now is Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Welcome to the programme. Help me understand why this has happened, because we've been told for years, haven't we, that we're all supposed to be moving our to electric, and we've been told repeatedly it's guaranteed to be cheaper for consumers. What's happened?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. The fundamentally, what we're seeing is the shine of electric vehicles is now disappearing. It is not so environmentally friendly. They're not so cheaper than normal. Don't forget, diesel and petrol is taxed with the highest tax drivers in the world, but electric vehicles aren't even taxed. So if you actually did a true comparison, electric vehicles would be ridiculously more expensive. EVs are wonderful if you can charge at home, and not drive more than about 50 to 100 miles around your own house, your own residence. But if you're going for long journeys, public charging points now are becoming ridiculously expensive, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
I mean, do you think that the dial is shifting on this question then? Do you think that more people are actually questioning whether or not some of the green things that have been touted over the last few years are actually meeting the needs that people have?
Well, it is. No government has had a proper joined-up road transport user, a road user transport strategy. And it is right we move to cleaner fuels. I'm not fighting that situation, but we shouldn't be forced into a mode of transport that isn't actually proven. And really, at the moment, from cradle to grave, an electric vehicle versus a fossil fuel vehicle is hardly any difference between the emissions that comes out of either of these types of vehicles. And yes, you're right, the shine is coming off it. But the problem we have got at the moment is that the government, like, if you remember on Friday, we had that mini budget. We had hoped for a fuel duty cut, because that would be the quickest way to reduce inflation and the impact of the cost of living crisis. They didn't do that. We don't understand that. And I spoke to Liz Truss during her election campaign, her leadership election campaign, and she said, don't worry, we're going to be on the side of drivers. But we're not seeing that at the moment. And the electric vehicle thing is adding to the confusion.
Is it now the case that there's really not a cheap way to drive these days? Because there was, people were left with hope, essentially, that if they switched to electric, then they could reduce their long-term bills for driving. But it all just seems to be completely expensive now, whether you're using diesel, whether you're using petrol or electric. So where does that leave motorists?
Well, in a difficult situation, but the important thing for this government is actually not tell us what to drive. Let's drive based on the actual merits of the vehicles. If electric vehicles are so good and they're wonderful, why didn't they stand up and why did the government decide to put in a ban on new diesel, new petrols, the sales of in 2030? What if they just allowed the natural clean energy or clean fuel energy development to continue? We'd be probably have hydrogen, and we'd probably have what's called Euro 7 diesel, which is very clean, etc., and electric vehicles working alongside of everything. But this government doesn't have a clue, and they're still very anti-car. Boris Johnson was one of the most anti-driver, anti-car administrations in living history. And unfortunately, you quite rightly point out, the choice of what to do is based on, in terms of expense. We can't really use that approach because, for example, there's a plumber friend of mine who's just wanted to buy a new white van, and he looked at a Berlingo electric vehicle. It's £37,000, but the diesel version is £26,000, £11,000 cheaper. Where's the incentive going on here to actually get people to actually move to cleaner fuels when you've got to pay £11,000 more for that privilege?
I mean, so what do you think the government could do now in order to kind of respond to some of the concerns you're raising? Oh, it seems we may have lost.
Have we got Howard? Yes, we have. We've got him back.
We lost you for a second.
You briefly transitioned into our royal reporter Cameron Walker, but it's 2022. You can transition into anything these days, but please carry on making your point.
Yeah, exactly. What the government can do is there's two major things we've been calling for. And I've got a lot of backbench support for this. It's one, we need to cut the cost of motoring because that would reduce the cost of the living crisis and reduce inflation. We had a 0.3% reduction in August in terms of inflation, and that is due to the fact that pump prices have come down by 10 pence. So it works. That logic, it follows through. And the other thing is we've got to stop this opportunistic profiteering in the fuel supply chain. Pump prices at the moment are about 20p more than they should be. And unfortunately, the government's allowing the fuel supply chain further up the fuel supply chain, not the small independent garages, to get away with actually basically exploiting drivers at every opportunity when we fill up. So that's what we want to see. And let's sit down the table and talk about what's the cleanest fuel to use long term, and don't push us into these cliff edge bans without consultation.